Hi, I'm Brandon Lucero, and you're about to experience the new way to thrive in business, entrepreneurship, and life by leaning into who you are, what you love, and standing up for what you want to create. Get ready, because this is where we go against the grain, say no to outdated society norms, and we say yes to change in order to create a happier, more fulfilled world. Welcome to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. Today we have an amazing episode lined up for you. We actually have one of our coaches coming in to talk to you about what they do. So we're not going to talk about messaging. We're not going to talk about all of that stuff. But Susan, our guest today, has been a coach for us for the last few years. And what she actually does inside of her business, I thought would be incredibly valuable for a lot of you guys, a lot of the listeners here on the podcast, especially since the last 2 years have been a little chaotic for almost everyone I've talked to. And so a lot of the things that she does and how she helps people, I thought would be super valuable. So Susan, welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited.
Yeah, I'm pumped too. And before the podcast, we even got rolling. You and I chatted, what time is it now? Almost for like 20 or 30 minutes. And I was like, there's a couple of moments of where I'm like, okay, we should just hit record now because the conversation's so good. So I'm excited to dive in, but do you mind just kind of telling everyone what it is you do? And then we'll just dive into that in a deeper level.
Yeah. So my name is Susan Choi, and I'm an empathic executive coach, and I help basically sensitive leaders, executives, entrepreneurs, how to achieve emotional mastery and identity mastery.
Okay. What does that mean? Like in some,
Yes. So I think that, let's just say this. I think that for those that already know they are that sensitive person or that empath, they've already tuned in.
yeah.
But for those that are not that sensitive, or maybe they don't know that they're sensitive, that
Right.
basically means that it's tuning in to your emotions, not as like I'm at the effect of what I feel, or I'm at the effect of other people's emotions, and therefore I need to avoid at all costs those situations. But
Right.
it's using your own emotions and understanding them as a tool. And when you can recognize in how to use those emotions as a tool, then you can get into more playful things, such as creating emotions that you actually want to feel for certain
Mm.
situations that are about to come up.
Okay. That makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense. And you said something that's pretty important, I think, which is you said there's people that are sensitive and aware and people that are sensitive and not aware.
Yeah.
And I want to focus on the not aware
Got it.
people right now. Because I remember way back in, not even way back, it's like 8 years ago. And I was with Jim Fortin and his partner, John, and we were on a trip with my wife and son. And I was just starting my path with Don Javier, and John said something to me, which is like, the energy affects everything. And I said, well, I feel fine when I go into like Airbnbs or crowded places or whatever. And he goes, well, the energy is still affecting you whether you're aware of it or not. And I remember that stuck with me. And I was just
Hmm.
like, well, what does that even mean? How does that appear? How does that manifest? How do we know that like something is affecting our emotions that we can't see or know? So what does that look like when someone is being affected, but they're unaware? Like, how would they even know if they are that person?
So I would say there's two ways.
Okay.
One is look at the results that you have. So if you're hanging on to those like last 8 pounds,
Mm,
right? If you aren't doing well in your job or your relationships, or you find that you are closed off and you don't have that many friends, but deep down you want that community of friends,
right.
it probably means the other thing, which is you're overeating. You're pouring the glass of wine just to keep the edge off.
Right.
You're zombieing out on Netflix like way too much. You're canceling on invites or just not responding at all to group texts.
Mm,
Or you're declining that meeting because, that person.
right.
And how they are. And so I would look at those two things and see, even if you don't know or you don't feel something viscerally in your body,
Right.
I would take note of how are you showing up? And what are you doing in your life that you don't like, but you just do because it's comfortable?
Right.
You know,
Okay.
I don't think many people realize that even, I mean, this is somewhat controversial, but even like happy emotions, excited emotions, like when you have an idea and you're like, whoa, I want to implement that right now. It's like, oh, but first let me check my phone. Or
Right.
like, I think I want to make a cup of coffee, and like, oh, I think I deserve this chocolate right now. It's like we totally distract ourselves because of the feeling. It's so intense. And
Right.
so we go and do something else. And so what is that something else in your life? You may not be aware of it because it's so normal. It's like normal everyday things, but like what is that? Just do an inventory of what that might be.
Right. Okay. And so if those things are showing up in someone's life, that's kind of what you're saying is you may be an empath who's sensitive to other energies around you that are affecting things like decision making and focus and things like that. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, it's kind of like I think everyone has feelings obviously,
Right.
but to what level it affects you is going to be different. Like if
Okay.
you're really tuned into your body and how you feel, you'll know immediately. And you can even name it. You can name the emotion. You can name the discomfort and where it's coming from. But for what you're talking about, for most people, I think that it shows up in very discreet ways.
Hmm.
Like they will, you know, open Instagram or TikTok. They'll go eat something. You know, they all of a sudden really love wine
Right.
because it's like it's the thing that kind of de-stresses them at the end of the day.
Gotcha.
Sometimes for workaholics, like these type A really smart people, how it shows up is that they will just work through the problem at work. So for
Okay.
example, let's say that you get an email and it's like 4:30 p.m. People are about to log off soon.
Right.
And this email, this person sounds disturbed and they're wondering, why isn't this here? Or why is there a delay on this project? And if you feel this urge because you see their cell phone number in their signature to like just pick up the phone and call them,
Right.
it's probably because you can't handle the feeling.
Gotcha.
You're
Okay.
feeling something, whether it's that person's energy or your own. It's like you're feeling something so much that it's like you can't even wait till the next day to respond or just, you know, send the email because you know it's not that urgent.
Right.
But I think for the sensitive person, it is urgent.
Yep.
And so you feel this need to like, oh my God, let me just hurry up and call this person.
I got you. Okay. So
Yeah.
my question was going to be, and I think you cleared it up. My question was going to be when you said like you can't get off the couch or you're always binging Netflix or you're procrastinating. I already knew an objection that some people may come up with is like, well, that's not really like has nothing to do with energy. It has everything to do with a lack of willpower. But you know, and I'm not saying that. It's just I know that's a thought that some listeners may have. But what you're saying, if I understand correctly, is that if you're an empath, and by the way, you don't even have to be an empath, in my opinion, and correct me if you think I'm wrong. Every single person is affected by energy. Like when someone you walk into a room and two people are fighting, no one has to say a word for you to know something's off here. Like that's because you're feeling and reading the energy. And so what you're saying is that especially as an empath, what you're doing is you're walking or going through life and you have experiences or you walk into a room and the energy of that room creates some sort of feeling inside of you. And when you have that feeling, you sometimes don't know what to do with it. And that affects the actions that you take. Like the example you had is this person emails you asking for whatever, you automatically feel I need to respond now. I need to call this person. And then that person may experience you as like overbearing or too much, but it was a result of you not being able to manage the energy or the emotions going on. Is that correct?
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned the room,
Yeah.
right? Like whether it's a meeting or whatnot, because a lot of what I teach my clients
Mhm.
is how to see emotions versus automatically feeling it.
Oh, interesting. What does that mean?
Right. So I teach this concept in my program and when I coach called personalization.
Hmm.
Everyone has personalization, right? And so we can look, if I were to hold up an apple
Yep.
for everyone and there were 100 people in the room, every single person would think something differently about the apple.
Hmm.
Somebody might think about like for example me, I have two apple trees in my backyard. I'd be thinking, oh, good thing I picked it like 2 weeks ago.
Right.
Like that might be my first thought. Somebody else might be thinking, oh, that's a green apple, I hate green apples. Somebody else might be thinking like, oh my God, that reminds me of my grandmother's like, apple baked pie or something. Everyone's just going to think something differently
Right.
about it. And so when we think something, we don't know this, but when we're thinking something, it immediately produces a feeling in our body.
Right.
And then from that feeling, we're going to show up a certain way. We're going to do certain things. Like I had mentioned, like we might go eat something or we might write the email that we were inspired to write, right? And then we get a result in our life. And if we don't change the personalization that is actually leading to the feeling, leading to what we're doing, we're just going to end up with the same result in our life.
Yeah.
And so what most people do, what they spend a lot of their time doing, which is what I spent a lot of my 20s doing, is we're trying to change the circumstance. So if we don't like the apple, well, let's just use another example. If you don't like your job, you're going to go look for another job.
Right.
Right? If you don't like the funnel, then you're going to look for another mechanism to get the result that you want.
Right.
But really, those things just sit there. If we don't change how we are personalizing something,
Right.
then the energy in which we show up and the actions that we take will just remain the same because we take our emotions with us wherever we go.
Right.
Right. And so that's what I mean by seeing and feeling is like when you enter a room and you're feeling, you're noticing other people's emotions, but when we're unconscious to it, we just soak it all up.
Right.
And we just think to ourselves, I don't like this. But once you recognize that everyone has personalization, then you can see the personalization instead of just automatically feeling the feeling is true for you.
Got it. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And also when you said apple, it's so funny because apple's like one of my favorite food, but specifically green apples are my favorite thing, like the Granny Smith green ones. So when you said apple, that's automatically what I envisioned. And then I had an automated action come up of like, I want to go get an apple. After this podcast, I want to go get an apple. I could see what you're talking about live in action here, where the feeling or the personalization was leading to some sort of action. So I do want to talk about how we can start to become aware of it, change it, shift it. What are the benefits of doing this, all that stuff. But I did have a question on where do we draw the line? Because if I understand correctly, it kind of sounds like, hey, if you're in a work, and maybe this is not what you're saying, but if you're in a work situation and it's not great, you automatically go look for another job. But what I think I'm hearing you say is, well, what if instead of having to go look for another job, what if you were able to handle the work situation? And am I better? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah. So something that I coach a lot of my clients on is, can you handle the situation as is
Right.
and be the person who you want to be before you change the outside world? It's kind of like if you're in any bad situation, you can just get rid of the problem. That's easy. You can delete someone from your life. You can pick up and like move somewhere else. You can do a lot of things to change the circumstance.
Right.
But what does life give you each and every time to teach the lesson? It's the same person wearing a different suit of clothes or a different situation that, that just kind of looks different, but has the same energy to it.
Right.
And so it's kind of like, how can you just feel comfortable where you are and know that you can not be neurotic, not be going crazy. Like it doesn't mean that you don't want to change your situation at some point.
Right.
But I always try to at least give the offer of, hey, what would it be like if this didn't need to affect you to like a level 10?
Well, because from my experiences, like if we don't do that, then the same circumstances will just start to repeat themselves over and over again. And that's what my question was going to be is like, where do we draw the line? Because there are some truly toxic places that you probably can't be and you shouldn't be. I mean, is it as simple as just like having boundaries that don't want to be crossed and then living in that way? Or, I mean, I guess I'll just throw it on you. Like where do we draw the line between understanding, okay, I need to adjust the way I'm interpreting this versus this is truly toxic and I need to like get out of here?
Oh yeah. I mean, if you know the situation that you're in, I always like to use it as I don't like the word to use the word test, but I do like to kind of in Jurassic Park where they throw the stick at the fence to see if
Yeah.
it's like actually on.
Right.
I like to do that for my own self sometimes of like, okay, what is my limit
Right.
to this? And this is so funny that you're mentioning this because I'm going to be talking about this soon on my podcast, and I call it like the pain signal scale.
Okay.
And it's kind of like if you see a row of faces, and to the very right, it's like happy green face, like you're so content, life is going well, and then like below that is like a semi-green face, and it's like you're content, like there's things going on, but you're content. And then there's like the yellow face where it's neutral and there's a little bit of discomfort, and then it just keeps going, like
Yeah.
there's the orange face and then the red face,
Right.
right? So there's 0, there's -1, -2.
Right.
And I always say that life has a way of signaling to you like what level of pain this is.
Mm.
And if you don't catch it soon enough, and I've been in this place, you get to the -2, the red face,
Right.
where now you need physical intervention, like you need medical help or something,
Right.
because we didn't even see the signs before.
Okay.
Right? So it's kind of like, sure, if you're in that situation, like get out of it. You don't even have a choice, to be honest.
Gotcha. So it's more
But if
of
you've
just
been
like,
through the ringer a few times, it's
yeah.
kind of like, okay, so what is the signal? Like, what do I need to learn here? Like, how can we use that type of thinking instead of let's just get out of it and look at it retroactively? Because when we're in it, that's kind of when we learn the most.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. So it kind of sounds like it's like you just measure the amount of pain that you're in, and if it's a certain level, then it's like, okay, we literally need to change the circumstance. But if it's somewhere where it's manageable but not great, it's like, okay, let's start to look at how do we change the way in which we're feeling or seeing or interpreting certain things. Is that,
Yeah. And
yeah,
don't get me wrong, I don't want to attach any judgment or good and bad, like morality, to any situation,
right?
because and you don't need to worry, people, like life will give you another one. Right? Like you and I both know, like there's always going to be something.
Yeah.
But I think that for the people listening to your podcast, they want to evolve, they want to grow.
Right.
And so it's how can we, instead of like finding the fastest ticket out of the situation that we're in, how can we just look at it and use it as a container for growth,
Right. Okay.
right? To asking ourselves, like, what am I not able to feel right now that feels
Right.
so uncomfortable?
Yeah.
What am I thinking? Like, how am I personalizing this so much that I don't see it as a sentence in my mind? I actually believe it to be viscerally true.
Mm.
Because a lot of the things, like a lot of the sentences that we hold in our mind, we don't even know we're thinking them.
Right.
They're so subconscious. We're just going through life and we don't even know that they're running the entire show, right? So it's kind of like whenever we're in a situation, how can I use this person or the situation to love more deeply, right? To do any of these things that really pushes us into that next level.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, this is so great. And I love the conversation about even the subconscious because obviously, as you know, we talk so much about that with messaging, but it's like your subconscious, unless you're aware, it's literally going to run the show 95% of the time. So I want to start talking about how can we go through this process? Because I know when we first met, you were doing a lot of like, you're almost labeled as like, not really a stress coach, but that's kind of the biggest symptom you had is like these people who were completely stressed out. You would help them become unstressed out, for lack of a better
Yeah.
explanation. And then now, you've kind of realized, okay, it's really about energy and, interpretations and feeling and being an empath. So if someone feels like you're kind of describing them, what would you say the steps are to becoming like to move out of that, to like become that green, happy person on your scale of pain? What do we have to do first?
Oh my God. Where do I begin?
The beginning. Start at the beginning.
There's just so much. Well, because I feel like the work is really in understanding that you are being at the, so if you're afraid of feeling something,
Mhm.
if you're constantly in dread of a certain meeting or a certain person, if you don't like to go out into certain like it's affecting your dinner choices.
Right.
Well, let's be real, right? Like we're thinking about going somewhere and we're like, oh, I don't know who might be there. Like sometimes, like as a sensitive person, you could take it that far, really.
Right. Yeah.
And then you think, oh, I'll order to go and eat at home,
Right. Yeah.
right? And I think something about the pandemic made things worse as well.
Yeah.
Anyways, but this process is in teaching how not to be at the effect of something, but rather being the person who can generate how you want to feel instead. And so instead of kind of like talking about this in theory, I think the best way to show this is if you want to be a live example of an exercise that I teach.
Okay. What is that?
So
I will do it.
I'm trying to decide right now, like which one should I do? Let's do processing of emotion.
Okay.
So let's say that you're going through a really hard time, like you're stressed out,
Yeah.
and I'm going to teach you a very simple process to process emotion through the body, but not with your mind. Because,
Okay.
and let me explain what that means.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I would say like 95% of the people, just because this is what we've been taught to do,
Yep.
is when we feel something. So let's say that we're really stressed out about something that happened at work or in our job. What we do is we think about the problem. So even to be more specific, let's say someone just quit on you,
Yeah.
right? It's like all of a sudden, it's like we're feeling all sorts of emotions. But what most people do is they start thinking through the problem
Okay.
of how do I fix this? And really what that means is how do I fix this so that I can feel better?
Mm,
Most people don't know that. They just think, oh, I'm fixing a problem. But
Yeah.
many people can quit and it doesn't need to bother
right.
someone, right? But for some reason, if it bothers you, then the thinking is actually trying to resolve the feeling,
Interesting. Yeah. That makes a lot of
right?
sense. Yep.
And so what most people do is that they think about the problem in their mind. But even if you have a plan laid out, you might feel a little bit better, but there's still that tension
Right.
in the body. And that's what we want to resolve for first. Because when you can become the type of person that's just like clean, right? Where your energy state is just back to neutral,
Right.
then you're making decisions from a better place. You're thinking more clearly. And it's not from like this rushed, like graspy, like I got to hurry up and like fix this energy.
Right.
And so let's say like if you're even going to interview someone next week, how you show up is going to be so much more different when you're just completely here
Yeah.
versus somebody who hasn't processed anything and they're like, okay, so tell me what you do. Oh, I really like that. It's just different.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna relate this to just a personal example, and just,
Okay.
just to make sure I'm on the right track. So everyone on the podcast knows that Taylor, our integrator, quit. I don't know, 6 or 7 months ago or something like that. And so it kind of surprised me, but it also sent me into like what you're talking about, thinking about the problem, like how do we fix this? What am I going to do? Things like that. Because we had like 2 weeks to try to replace her and she basically ran the entire company. And I didn't realize it at the time, but hearing you kind of like walk through this process, I realized I flip-flop between that. I flip-flop between like, oh my God, what are we going to do? To, like it already happened. And whether I freak out about it or not, I'm still going to have to find a solution. So let's just find a solution and stop the freaking out. But then like the next day I would flip flop like, oh my God, what am I, what am I going to do? There's so many things I don't know, like half of what she does, all of that stuff. So, am I understanding this correctly? That when I'm thinking about the problem, that's kind of me using logic to go, oh my God, what are we going to do? And that kind of puts us in a state of like panic or fight or flight. And that's not a really good place to create decisions from, is kind of what I'm hearing. Is that?
Yeah, and there's scientific research. I would have to find the literature. I don't have it like offhand that I can quote. But there is scientific research that shows that emotions can be processed, like when we actually properly process them in the body, they have a lifespan of about 90 seconds.
Really?
But if we don't actually process the emotion, what do is we bottle it up. And when we bottle things up and we turn to other things like overworking, overeating the bag of chips, pouring the extra glass of wine, working out, what we're doing is we're burning ourselves out over a
Wasting
long period
energy.
of time. Yeah, if we don't actually process the emotion.
Uh,
And it's kind of like when we think about the flotation device, like you can try all you might, like put it underwater,
right.
but it's going to come back up. And that's
That's something.
what our emotions do. And this is why people end up snapping at people they love or their
Mm.
coworkers, or like it comes out in a different way that
And
we
we might
don't
be,
intend it to.
I might be getting off in a tangent here, but there's also been so many books and studies and stuff done that say that even the bottled up emotions lead to illnesses,
Yeah.
sickness,
Hmm.
physical pain. Like I broke my back 20 years ago, and I would throw it out every year. And then one year it got so bad that couldn't even move anything. Otherwise I'd be like crying, literally crying in pain. And I read the book, The Great Pain Deception,
Right. Yeah.
and that's all it was like figuring out what emotion is trapped and processing and releasing. And I kid you not, like within a minute it was like I was walking totally fine again, and I did
Yeah.
nothing. I mean, I did everything, like acupuncture, I did everything, and nothing worked except for that. So
Right.
my next question for you is like, okay, let's say we're going through emotion, we become aware we're going through that emotion. How do we process the emotion?
So
What's
that's the exercise. So that was what I was gonna
Okay,
put you
perfect.
through.
Perfect.
a
Love it.
live exercise.
Yeah, let's do
So I
it.
want you to, and you're gonna have to keep your eyes closed for part of this.
Okay.
So go ahead and close your eyes right now,
Okay.
and I want you to think about a situation that's either in the past or about to come up, and it creates some sort of emotion for you.
Okay. Um, like a unwanted emotion.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, something that just creates tension in your body.
Okay. Got it.
Okay. And I want you to almost turn up the dial on this, where out of like 0 to 10, you feel it at like a 7 or 10 right now.
Okay.
Okay. Now, I want you to scan your body and just notice where in your physical body is this emotion right now.
Can it be in two places?
Sure.
Okay. Got it.
Okay. And now I want, as you focus on that area of your body, I want you to notice, is it moving? Like, does it have a frequency to it?
When you say moving, is it like moving to different spots, or do you mean like it's like vibrating almost? Like,
Yeah. Like, is it vibrating? Is it
yeah.
spinning?
I feel it more as like a vibration, like a
Yeah.
pulsating.
Yeah. And if it had a tone to it, is it like a high tone? Is it a low tone? Neutral? Maybe there's no tone, but just kind of tune into that.
A little bit more high pitch.
Okay. And now I want you to notice, is there a color to this emotion?
Green.
Green, yeah. And now let's take a moment to see, is it solid? Is it translucent? What kind of texture does it have?
Solid.
Okay. And now that you know this about this emotion, I want you to take a moment and just breathe into that space. So taking a deep breath in, exhaling it all out, keeping your attention on that space. Take a deep breath in, letting it all go. One last time, take a deep breath in, exhaling it all out. And now in your mind's eye, I want you to almost grab that emotion in those two spots
Mm-hmm.
and like yank it out of you until it's right in front of you. And if it doesn't want to listen, that's okay. Just yank it out. And I want you to connect with it, like look at it eye to eye,
Does that
and
mean
just ask.
in mind's eye or physical?
Yeah, in your mind's eye. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's right in front of you. You're connecting with it.
Okay.
And just ask. What are you trying to tell me? What do you want from me? What do you need from me? And just open that line of communication and see what it has to say.
Okay.
And you're more than welcome to share anything as well.
Open my eyes.
Yes.
Okay, so here's what my experience was. I felt it in my neck and like back as a all one thing,
Yeah.
and then also in my heart. And so it was just like dense, almost like I just need to like massage. I need like a, I feel like most people be like, oh, I need a massage because I'm so tense, I have so much stress,
Right.
and that's kind of where I felt it. But for the exercise, it was I couldn't have my attention both on the heart and back and neck, so I focused mostly on the neck, which feels great right now, by the way. Um, so it came out as grain. It was like a grain thing, and the thing that came up for me was more about like money
Mm-hmm.
and the business because we're in a pretty big evolution and pivot, and so we're moving away from like what's been working really, really well for us and evolving to something else. And I've done this a few times. So like moving through it and going into it quickly, like is not a problem. But there is some automated just emotions of like, well, what if it doesn't work out? What are we going to do? You have payroll, you have all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
And so when it came out and connected with me, I went right back to being a kid and seeing a fight with my parents over money. And then my parents actually, well, they got a divorce, but they got a divorce because there's a lot of things stacked up. But the final straw was like it was money related and business related, like my dad's business not really working out and money issues coming up. And it was like then you said something like ask what it wants from you or whatever,
Yeah.
and it basically said forgive both of your parents. And I was like,
Mm.
whoa, because I felt like I already have. I've been doing a lot of work, especially this last year in that,
Right.
but I didn't realize there was another layer to it. And so that's
Mm.
basically what came up for me. So that was pretty incredible. Like, I feel
Thank you
like we
for
can just
sharing that.
end the podcast now and just like,
Yeah.
you guys can chop that, have that as a download and just, like, you're good. That was
Yeah.
pretty amazing.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I've had people cry, like grown men cry,
Yeah.
because it's like the first time that they started to like feel something.
Right.
And it's very powerful to do this for yourself.
It is. And I think as men, I think the bottling down and to not show emotions has been, ever since I've been a kid, for even generations past me, has been the way we handle emotions. And it's
Right.
so destructive. And then it's like
Yeah.
as an adult, if you really want to like change a lot of stuff, it's like, okay, cool. Now you have to go back and undo so much of that bottling up.
Right.
And
And
not
then
just men,
so
it's for everyone, but
yeah, and one thing I want to mention while it's on my mind is a lot of people, there are some people where they'll ask me, so how do I get rid of it? Like, I don't ever want to feel that.
right.
And what I say is, well, right now you think that that emotion is not a part of you. Like, you
Mhm.
still think that it's something that's like that is against you or it's
Right.
separate from you.
Right.
But if you really think about personalization, if at some point you had a thought that led to that feeling, you can almost see that emotion as if that's like a past version of you,
Mm. Yeah.
right? Like it's not separate from you. Like this is a part of you that you had felt and that you had generated. And so it's kind of like, how can you connect with it and reassure it
Right.
that because probably what any emotion needs, which is what all of us need, is just an acknowledgement.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I see you. You're here. It's accepting, right?
Right.
And not resisting. And it's from that place where it's like, now we don't have to hold up the fight, like the tension. It's like, okay, we're
Right.
here.
And
And it
so
just feels so much better.
would you recommend, like, I know you said the acknowledgement is sometimes all we need, but do we need to take action on certain things too? Like, for example, with mine, it says, forgive your parents, which would require some sort of action. So is it enough just to acknowledge, I hear you, I see you, or is it required that now I'm like, okay, cool, now you have to do the work to actually let go and forgive?
Yeah, and what I meant by acknowledge is I meant acknowledge the emotion,
Got it. Okay.
not whatever it's saying.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, that's gold. We want to
Like
keep that.
acknowledge its existence.
Yeah, acknowledge the existence of the emotion
Got it. Okay.
instead of just thinking like, okay, well, I'm done with that.
Got it.
Yeah. Because that's resistance. That's going to keep it alive.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, where do we go from here? So it's like we kind of acknowledge or become aware of the emotion. We go through that process or a similar process of what you just brought me through.
Yeah.
To acknowledge it, to recognize it, to become aware of it, and then we can start to release it. Is there another step after that, or we just kind of repeat this process
So this
over?
is a process that you should be repeating every time you feel something.
Got it. Okay.
And again, most people, they will do this in their head.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, another tool. Like, okay, in my head, da, 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 well, it probably might say this, done. It's
Right.
like, that's not the same as like actually going through the process for your body,
Got it.
right? But after that, after you've processed it and you really do feel like, okay, I've processed this. It's not, on a pain scale, it's probably at like a 1.
Yeah.
Now we need to go back to the
Okay.
personalization that created the problem,
Okay.
that created the emotion, I should say. So it's kind of like, or creating the problem that you have right now, that's creating the emotion,
Right.
right? And so then we have to go back to our personalization and think, okay, if I was unconsciously thinking of this,
Right.
that was having me feel this way, what do I need to repersonalize now? How do if I were to think about this consciously or from my higher self or from my future self,
Right.
what is that person thinking that's actually creating a whole new, butterfly effect in this reality?
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So it's both thought and mind. It's like brain and heart. We need to do both of the work.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do we give a new personalization then?
Well, we have to examine the thinking. So remember, if we don't know what we're thinking,
Yep.
we can find out by how we're feeling.
Okay.
So our feelings are almost like the guiding light to what we're thinking.
Got it. Okay.
So let's say you're going about your day and all of a sudden you feel anxiety.
Yep.
That's weird, but I was just listening to a podcast. If you really tune into that feeling, you say, okay, but I was feeling anxiety, and you trace it back,
Yep.
you will find that even while you were listening to the podcast, you may have had a thought of like, oh, well, I'm not doing nearly as well in my own business,
Got it. Okay.
which created the feeling of
Got it.
anxiety.
I see.
So now that you know that, you want to go back to the thought
Yeah.
and examine the thought. It's like, is that really true?
Right.
That's where the coaching comes in, right? Where we have to coach
Yeah.
the thought and then, create a whole new identity piece to what do you want to be thinking and believing.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So again, I'm just going to recap, make sure that I understand. And so it's basically what you're saying is because 95% of our thoughts are subconscious, we're unaware of them. They're still happening, but then they all of a sudden will spark some sort of emotion. We feel this emotion, unwanted emotion. We trace that emotion. We go through the exercise that you had brought us through to realize, like, here's what the emotion wants you to understand, or here's what your subconscious is referring to. But we also need to look back at what was the thought that triggered it. So for me, maybe it's like you said, I'm listening to a podcast and someone's talking about money, and then all of a sudden I start to feel like, oh my gosh, like my business, I don't have enough money, or whatever it is. I can go through that process and then trace back to here's the thought that caused the emotion, and we need to repersonalize that thought. And if we can do that, then we start to limit these unwanted emotions. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Because when you catch that old thought
Yep.
and you tell yourself like, oh, there goes my brain again.
Yeah.
You're not attaching the meaning and believing the meaning
Right.
unconsciously, like throughout your day for weeks.
Right.
But when you're looking at that thought and you think, oh, that's so interesting, and you decide for yourself, like, how do I actually want to think about this?
Right.
And you know, there's a fine line between like positive thinking and like really believing something.
Right.
I think if the thought is too far beyond reach, like if it feels like an affirmation, like I can do this, and it's you're just like, I don't know if I can, you know, like you're just feeling that, then I would say, you know, bring it down a notch and create a believable, small, factual, believable thought that your brain can actually repeat over and over again. Because
Gotcha.
again, we're forgetting, like we're trying to quantum leap into this new person, but we forget that like everything is a small little process that you don't change overnight, although sometimes that does happen. But
Yeah.
you know, it's like a gradual process. And so the next believable thought might be something like, I'm learning to make this happen.
Okay. Yep.
Like it's so
Then,
much better, right? It's like, okay, I'm learning you're on board with it, your subconscious is going to be on board with it, and you just repeat to yourself, I'm learning to make this happen.
yeah.
If Brandon can do it, I can do it. Like whatever it is, right? But you just have to be conscious to what are you repeating in your mind.
Right.
Like I always say that, you know, your subconscious is the subconscious, right? It's going to do things by default, but it doesn't judge what it's thinking.
Mm.
But your conscious mind, right? What you decide to consciously filter into yourself is the gatekeeper.
Yep.
And if you can be consciously aware of like what you are feeding yourself, of what you're telling yourself, of that inner voice and that inner dialogue in your head, and you create enough space where you don't have to believe everything that your voice is saying,
Right.
but you can be the gatekeeper of that and decide, I like that, I don't like that. Then your subconscious is going to start repeating or doing some of those things that you probably want it to do versus like just being on default mode.
Right. Okay. This is super helpful. There's a couple notes that I want to kind of highlight here. For me, it felt like, especially doing the exercise, it just felt like it's calming the nervous system a little bit. Is that partly what we're doing here? Because, you know, Don Javier gave us this tool to use where you can kind of like breathe through your nose and breathe out. And it's been scientifically proven to calm the nervous system and stop that. Like it felt very similar. Is that part of what
Yeah.
we're doing here through that exercise that you gave us?
Yeah, absolutely. There's like
Okay.
a breathing component to it, and you're creating a safe space in your mind and your body
Right.
to just feel emotion without, you know, ah,
Right.
being so afraid of it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. And that makes a lot of sense. And then even just going back to even my scenario too, it's just, I had another realization as I was hearing you kind of explain all of this stuff is like logically, this whole idea that we're not gonna have enough money and blah, 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 this next evolution, whatever, it makes no logical sense because we have enough in our business savings account to last for a pretty long time. So the fact that I'm like going through this like logically and I put it out on paper, I'm like, no, we're fine. We still have all this revenue coming in. We still have all this savings. But what I'm realizing now is there was this subconscious or unconscious fear stemming way back to this like experience I had as my kids needing some sort of forgiveness. And then, um, you know, ultimately, like I saw money play out in divorce and like ripping a family apart as a kid. So there's all these unconscious things going on is when the business is not like stable or we're actually going through like a shift or whatever, all of a sudden these unconscious things are coming up from like the past. And I think what, you know, that exercise helped me do is even just apply like logic to it without,
Hmm.
you take out like what you said, the processing, or you take out the attachment or the meanings or whatever. And it allows you just to kind of look at all the cards on the table and go like, yeah, you don't really need to freak out over X, Y, and Z. Like that's not even an issue. And
Right.
so um, it pops you out of unconscious to conscious and aware, which is pretty incredible. It's pretty amazing. Um,
Yeah.
you
It's
know,
so weird how like when you can just name something,
right?
it creates like this, "Ah, oh, that's what it was,"
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So another question I have is like we started this whole conversation about, you know, the empathic executive coach is kind of what you are and what you do and kind of how you label yourself. And you said you work with mostly like empaths and, you know, people that are very sensitive to things. but I feel like what you do can apply to anyone, even if they're not an empath. So why empaths? Like, why are we focusing just on that, or is that just a label that you like using? Like, why? Like, it's because it's beneficial for everyone, right?
It is. It is. So it's funny because you just had an NGM event,
Yeah.
right? Like a
Yep.
3-day event, and you talked about like everyone's trying to get to level 3 of like what you will become,
Mhm.
but you have to start at level 1 and level 2, and that's the evolving of what you offer, who you are, things of that nature.
Right.
And so everything always stems from my own experience. So when I first started, I was like an adrenal fatigue burnout coach.
Mm.
And because that's what I went through.
Right. Yeah.
And then that second level was, oh no, it's a stress management coach because that's
Mm.
really the root.
Yeah.
And then, over the past few years, I started to realize, yes, people were coming to me because of stress,
Right.
but the type of people that was working with over and over again was that sensitive person
Mm.
or that deeply empathic person. And I don't mean like empath. I feel like there's two ways people can think about it. One is like, oh, I feel all the emotions. And then the other one is somebody who's just like has deep empathy.
Hmm.
They're just so kind, like they feel so much. They can, look at a photograph and just like, oh my God, like they're just, there's so much emotion that's
Right.
there for them. And I started to realize, wow, like I didn't even really say that I was working with these people, but these people were coming. And I
Interesting.
think it's because that's who I was too,
Mm.
right? Like along that burnout, stressed out person that I was, in parallel, there was also that highly sensitive person that felt like a fragile glass vase.
Right.
And that if I wasn't careful, it was going to break and shatter all over the place. That's how I
Right.
felt with myself.
Gotcha.
And it wasn't until through healing all of this and working through this that I started to coach other people on this as well.
Gotcha. I mean, it makes sense. Like, that's what we talk about when it comes to messaging. You talk about your experience, who you are, your values, what you're, going through, things like that, or what you have gone through, and that will attract people, most like you. So obviously that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
Um, this podcast has been amazing, and what's funny is like when we originally, reached out to you to have you come on the podcast, I thought we were going to talk about stress management, and this was a lovely surprise to be able to
Yeah.
go this deep, and to have me actually go through the process was pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you feel like people need to know about this that we didn't cover so far on this episode?
I would just leave it where what I want to say is if you struggle with feeling so much, like I used to say to my friends all the time, I'm just so tired of feeling so much.
Mhm.
Like, why do I have to feel so much? Is what I used to always say.
Right.
And if you're that person, I just want you to know that feelings don't have to limit your life experience. Like, I think every one of us has that vision of what they think life can be like.
Yep.
And if that's seated in you, that's absolutely possible for you. And I would not let feelings be an emotion for you not to live that life.
uh, Love it. Okay, one last question that popped up as I was listening to you.
Yeah.
We focus a lot on the negative unwanted emotions with this process.
Mm-hmm.
Can we do the same with positive emotions? I think you mentioned earlier we could, to enhance them or keep them around longer.
Yes.
And if so,
Yes.
do we just follow that same process? Hey, here's the emotion. Let me trace it back to the situation or the unconscious thought. Is it just as simple as that, or what does it look like?
There's different scenarios. So same process, but
Hmm.
maybe tweaking some of the visuals. So for example, if you know that you are going to have a speaking event coming up,
Yep.
you can visualize that speaking event and start going through the process of what does confidence or connection feel like in the body? And you start really honing in on what that might feel like in the body until you feel it,
Mm.
right? You can also, yeah, there's so many ways that you can create it, but that's kind of like I walk my clients through different visualization techniques depending on their situation.
Okay.
Yeah, and so that's one. Is like if you have a speaking event or like an interview or whatever it may be, imagine you in that situation
Mhm.
and now scan that body and feel the difference between, because I think what most people do is they scan the body and they're feeling their current emotion of
Uh,
anxiety.
right. Yep.
Like they're not even seeing or feeling like what confidence might feel like,
Right.
right? And so if that's the case, go back to step number 1, process all that emotion, and then from a very neutral space, like now that you've calmed your nervous system down,
Yep.
now paint the picture and scan the body of you standing on stage, and what does that look like in your body? And I think for a lot of people, like they imagine a color, like they imagine like a glowing yellow color, like just over their heart,
Mhm.
right? Or and it's different for everybody. If some people like they want to be like roar, like they imagine like red, like just emanating red, you know.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like, and as you do that, you're getting to know, oh wow, like that's what confidence or connection looks like in my body. And
Interesting.
you develop this affinity with that, right? And then you can do that over and over again until it becomes, part of you closer and closer to that event.
Well, I mean, that makes a lot of sense because I heard, well, for me, when it comes to messaging, I always have focused on mastery. And another word for mastery, I guess, well, we'll do it this way. The only way to get mastery is through experience. And the only way you truly know something or can talk in messaging wise on those deep levels is to experience something. But it's been scientifically proven, which I'm just letting the listeners know, that the brain doesn't know the difference between something that actually happened in real life or a visualization. So if you can visualize you standing with confidence on stage, you actually gain that knowing or that experience as if you've already done it, which you can kind of tap into when you finally go in the physical to step on stage.
Right.
I'm understanding that correctly, yeah?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Because, I mean, if we're talking neuroscience,
Right,
there you have a neural network in your brain and your body. And
right.
every time you do something, you think something, this is how the subconscious works. It creates like this fire, this connection,
Hmm.
this neural synapse that goes tick, tick, like that. And
Yeah.
then it until it's become wired.
Mm.
And so this is why things that are wired are like you drive somewhere and you're like, how did I get here?
Right,
Right? Or you're brushing your teeth, like texting, how to log onto your computer. Those are all things that you've done so many times that it's become wired.
right,
It's become like it's a synapse that just gets fired all the time.
right.
But like what you were saying, if we want to unlock or unwire something, that's possible because everything's malleable,
Hmm.
right? And if you wanted to create something, that's also possible because now you just need to get into the habit of firing that off so many times that it becomes wired.
Yeah.
And so
Awesome.
oftentimes when you hear people say like you have to repeat it, repeat it, repeat it, whether it's an action, a thought, or a feeling, until you do, and then you just believe it.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've had this experience, and probably many people listening. It's like I've had those experiences where I believed something that hasn't happened yet to be so true
Hmm.
that I didn't even care if that experience happened.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I did it. Like it's done. And
Yeah.
now when you think about whatever that event is or whatever that goal that you have, you just don't have that like, oh, I need to get there. Where is this person or where is the money or whatever. It's just going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have had a lot of experiences like that. One of them is when I won the lottery, like almost won the lottery. I don't know if this is the same thing, but that's kind of what I did is lived in this visualization and just knowing of like, this is literally going to happen. I know it's going to happen. I can feel
Yeah.
it. And lo and behold, it did. I messed it up at the end, but it came true. And that's just one example. And that's just the lottery, but it's like you can do that with anything, like you talk about with confidence on stage or confidence in a video or a launch or anything like that.
Yeah.
Um, so I love that. And yeah, I love that we can bring the neuroscience in there because I know we've had people like Jim Thornton and Dr. Shannon Irvin on the podcast talking about that. And I know Shannon specifically is very huge on visualizations because that's exactly what she said is that the mind will form wiring for that, even
Yes.
if it's not here in the physical, but it's still there in your brain and you can tap into it, and then it manifests in the real, actual 3D physical, when you're able to do that.
Yeah.
Love that. Have I ever told
Absolutely.
you the lottery story, by the way?
No, I was about to ask you. I'm like, is this public information?
I think I might have told it on someone else's podcast or whatever. It's slightly off topic, but it's entertaining. So I'll tell it real quick. I was sitting in college one day, and the only reason why I went to school, went to UC Irvine, was basically to run cross country and track. I had a full ride to run cross country and track, and so I'm sitting there, and I'm like, I just hated school, and I still hate formal education. I'm like, I don't. Maybe I have ADD. I just can't sit there. I just want to go take action. I want to go do things, and so. Um, Anyways, I was bored in lecture one day, and I just said, if I could just win the lottery, I wouldn't have to be sitting here. And I just made the decision. I'm like, I'm going to win it today. It's $80 million. I'm going to win it today. It's going to happen. And I said, okay, I'm going to write down my six numbers, the five in the Powerball or whatever, the last
Hmm.
one. And I said, okay, I'm going to do it. And I wrote down the first six numbers that popped up in my head. Boom, 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 wrote them down. I go to the place to buy the ticket. And I'm writing all the numbers down, and the two last numbers were like side by side. It was like 36, 37 or 24, 25. They were like one after another.
Yeah.
And I said, that makes no sense. They're not going to pick two that are right next to each other, even though it's totally random and it doesn't, it doesn't matter. So I crossed one of them out and I changed it. And I get home that night and there's like a party going on at our house. And so we have all these people running around and drinking and going crazy. Like it got pretty wild when we had parties there. Like people are just going nuts. And I'm just sitting in my room and everyone's yelling at me for to come out. And I'm like, no, I'm waiting, hitting refresh on the computer. And I remember thinking like, I need to win the lottery and then I can go out and like hang out with my friends. And so I hit refresh, the numbers pop up. And I look at the first one, it's a match. I look at the second one, it's a match. And I remember
Oh my
being
God.
unfazed by it. I'm like, yep, of course, second, third one, a match, fourth one, a match. So I'm 4 out of 4. And I get to the fifth one, and it was the number that I crossed out and changed. Had I kept
Oh,
it the same, I would have been 5 for 5. The last number was off the Powerball or whatever it was. But had I gone with the original numbers that I gotten, I would have won like $150,000 or something like that. And I still
wow.
won. I got 4 out of 6. I think I won like $150, but I missed out basically on like 150 grand because I changed that last number. But out of everything in my life, there's two things that I knew for certain with like absolute 100% confidence. Actually, there's a lot actually now I think about it, but
Yeah.
two of them that have really that really just strong my mind is that day because there was zero doubt. It just didn't exist. I just knew it was going to happen.
Hmm.
And the second one was that I will eventually be successful. And I remember like trying things and not working, and people on in the online space, like not making fun of me, but like commenting on ads and certain things like that. And I just said, one day I'm going to be a big name, and they're going to be like, wow, that's the person that I made fun of way back in the day. And so those are the two things that kind of stuck out in my mind. But now
Hmm.
talking to you, I realized I was creating some sort of wiring going
Yeah.
on inside of my brain and my subconscious.
Yeah, and I just want to comment for first of all, crazy story. How did I
Yeah.
never hear that over
I
the
don't
last
know.
few years? And the second one is just commenting on what you just said. You believed in something so much that when you had the trolls or when something didn't work out, notice how the way that you personalize it wasn't what most people, how most people would personalize it.
Mm,
Because instead of like, oh no, like what's going on, or like, oh my God, maybe it's not going to happen, what you thought was, or what you felt was like confusion.
right.
You're like, I'm so confused. I thought that that was going to be the way.
Right.
Right?
Well, the way
And
I
yeah.
personalized it, I, it was just like, these people don't understand because this is what's going to happen. And so instead
Right.
of letting it be like, oh, this means, I'm gonna personalize it, like I don't have what it takes, it's like, and I didn't realize that was even going on, obviously. So I'm
Yeah.
very grateful for the way I was personalizing it now. But like you said, the way I was personalizing it was, this is going to happen. It's inevitable. These people are just wrong and confused. And it actually led to a much better place. Like you said, it led to a much better decision-making place. It led to me taking more action. It led to me following the path and doing what I needed to do.
Yeah.
And it didn't lead to a lot of like distraction. It didn't lead to a lot of emotional pain. It was just more of like, what? I don't, these people just don't get it. Like, I'm just so confused why they're like, how did they not see it? How did they not know that
Right.
I'm going to be successful?
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
very, another
I
great
feel like
example
I
is
feel
like,
like that's the
you know,
secret to a lot of people's dreams.
mm,
And it doesn't have to be a business dream. It could be any dream,
right,
but it's the belief. Because that's what's going to get you to keep going on the journey.
right. Yeah,
And it's about the journey anyway, right? But that's what gets you to just take one more step each day. Like on this day I'm going to do this, on the next day I'm going to do this. But if we don't really believe, we're just going to it just takes us a little bit longer,
right.
you know. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
I
I
love
really
it.
like that.
Yeah. Well, I feel like we ended it and wrapped up with two kind of great little stories and situations here to kind of bring it all full circle and show people kind of like what we're talking about in real life. So, if people want to learn more about you or to work with you or anything along those lines, where can they go to learn more?
So you can head to my website. It's www.stressproofpodcast.com. And there you will find a resources section where it's all free webinars, resources, podcasts, over 150 episodes.
Nice.
Anything that you want to read or watch to help you with getting emotional mastery.
I love it. One more question that just popped up. I know we were about to wrap up the episode, so it just entered my head. Can you do this work with kids? And have you?
Yes. So this is the most amazing thing is I think about this all the time because I think, oh my God, if my parents had this tool
Mhm.
and they just allowed me to feel the emotion,
Yeah.
it wouldn't have led to, I don't even know if my mind is blanking, if I had mentioned it on this podcast, but I definitely had a binge eating past. I had what do you call it, where you work out so much
Yeah.
just to let things out, but I didn't know that that's why I was working out. I just thought I liked working out.
Right.
And I had a travel addiction for sure because
Mm,
traveling was such a big distraction
right.
for
Right.
allowing me to not feel what I was feeling wherever I was living at the time.
Right.
And so I think that, if you're a parent and you just ask simple questions like, oh, like where do you feel it in your body? Like does it have a color? Like is it moving? Like just very simple questions,
Mm,
and it gets them to drop in. And you can even ask, questions like, what do you think that it wants to tell you? Or like, do you want to give it a hug?
right.
And just it's kind of like when they hug their teddy bear. It's like, do you want to give it a hug? Oh, it's right here in your chest. Why don't you just kind of like, rub your chest, touch your heart.
Right.
And it's so much better doing it that way than trying to think through it. Because I think a lot of people, if they're doing it to themselves and they're probably thinking like, oh, that kid's bothering you, like, well, let's go over here.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Well,
we never adjust the feeling. We're just like changing the circumstance.
well, yeah, this is so interesting. And I'm so grateful for this conversation because I catch myself telling my kids to like, stop the crying, go do this. You want to cry, go in your room. And I realize, and in the moment, I'm catching myself. I'm like, God, every time I do that, it's just an automated response. But every time I do that, it's not letting them feel or express those emotions, which therefore are going to start getting bottled up, pushed down, not expressed.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so I think what you're saying is really helpful for me because it's just a different thing. Like, why are you upset? Express that. Can you give it a hug? Can you do this thing?
Yeah.
Not only does it move their attention from whatever is like bothering them in the moment, but it gets them to even process it and get rid of it. Or maybe, I don't know
Yeah.
if it gets rid of it, but at least not bottle it down.
Yeah, because if you just allow them to feel it, not, again, not with their mind, so not asking
Right,
questions like, why are you upset? But just
right,
going into the body and saying, like, where is it?
right,
Oh, like, let's touch it right here.
right,
Like, is it slowing down? Like just kind of having their attention go to inside their body.
right. Yeah,
And then they'll be like, oh, let me think about that. And they'll
yeah.
probably stop crying.
It's very interesting. I'm gonna try it with my 3-year-old, see if she
Yeah.
can understand it, do it.
Yeah,
I
and
know that the 6 and the 8-year-olds will get it.
yeah. And something else that I saw, I was recently up visiting some friends. They live an hour and a half away up north.
Mhm.
And they have two wow, wild boys. And, one of them does get into these crying fits, or like they just start screaming because something upsets them.
Right.
And I was so amazed because, and she's a massage therapist. Like, she does a lot of this work as well in the body.
Right.
And the moment that he has a screaming fit, she'll say to Rowan, that's his name, she goes, "Let it out, Ro, let it out." Like, she just acknowledges him in that moment, says, "Yep, that's right, get it out, get it out." And I'm just like, wow, like, that's so much better than just being like, okay, and like turning around and not acknowledging like what he was going through.
Yeah.
And then as soon as he let it out, it was over. He just went back to playing with his trucks.
Well, that's so true. That works a lot. And it's interesting too, because I find, at least with my own kids, their personality has a lot to do with it. Because, one of my kids that'll work amazing. It's like, let it out, cry it, do what you need to do, scream, release it. But then the other one really just wants to be heard. Like, doesn't want to really like, God, and just like let it out.
Right.
They, like you said, they just want to be acknowledged. They just want to be like, oh, I see you're in pain. I see this really bothered you. Right. I totally get it. And that's all understandable. And then like we'll stop. The crying stops, the upset stops. They just want to be heard and comforted. While the other one of my kids was just like, oh, hell yeah, let's let this thing out.
Right.
Crazy. So it is really interesting on how even the personality will differ on how you want to process the emotion.
And notice, even for yourself, not you, but just like all of us. So I used to be that person where I couldn't, like, yelling or like punching a pillow, like that just didn't help me.
Right. Yeah.
That's very popular advice, right?
Right.
Now, and it was more about the acknowledgement piece.
Yeah.
About like really feeling things first.
Yeah.
And then acknowledging that I was safe. Acknowledging the emotion, right? So acknowledging the emotion, processing it, feeling it in my body, and then basically telling myself, like, girl, you're safe. Right. You're here right now. Right. And then as the years went on, I'm noticing like a shift with certain emotions. And this is the cool part, is that as you do this for yourself, you'll start to know, like, oh, if it's this emotion, I need to do this.
Right.
If it's this kind of emotion, like, this is what I need to do. So for me, I know that if it's like sudden anger or like frustration, or if I feel like I was wronged, I need to let out like this guttural, like, like while I'm driving or if I'm by myself, like I just let it out, and that's all I need.
Right.
To just acknowledge that vibration that wants to just let it be, like it wants to ride that wave. And so, yeah, I do think that with everybody, it's different. There's a different season, but just play with it. That's the cool part, is you experiment, and there is going to be an outlet. Like there is a way.
Self-discovery process.
Yeah.
Love it. Cool. Well, Susan, I appreciate you coming on to the podcast. I feel like the episode just kept getting better and better the more we talked, and especially this last part about kids is just awesome. So I appreciate it. Can you just remind everyone once more where they can go if they want to learn more about you and what you do?
Yes, www.stressproofpodcast.com/resources.
Awesome. Susan, thank you so much. And for everyone listening, if you guys have not left us a review on iTunes and you would like to do that, I'd be so grateful for that. We always love reading those reviews. So head over to iTunes, leave us a review, and I will see you all on the next episode. Take care, everyone. Hey guys, thank you so much for checking out another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, go below, hit the subscribe button, and make sure you click on that bell icon and get notified every time we drop a new episode. Now, if you're looking for the show notes, we have them linked underneath this video, as well as our social media handles and some links to free training and offers that we drop from time to time to help you guys even further. So go check those out if you're interested, and thank you so much for tuning in to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast.